If you're new here, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this one. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss the ending of this. It's a tale of betrayal, hidden strength, and justice served cold. And it all started with a single, shocking question in a place I never thought I'd be. The air in the courtroom was stale, thick with the scent of old paper and cheap polish. It felt sterile, a place where emotions were dissected and weighed on cold, impartial scales. I sat on the hard wooden bench, my knuckles white as I gripped the worn handle of my briefcase. Across the aisle, my son, Mark, refused to meet my eyes. He stared at his hands, his shoulders slumped in a posture of such profound shame it was almost a physical presence in the room. Beside him, however, his wife, Brenda, was the picture of confidence. A smug, predatory smile played on her lips as she whispered something to their lawyer, a man whose suit probably cost more than my first tractor. She glanced over at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. It was the look one gives to a dying animal, something to be put out of its misery so the inheritance could finally be claimed. They thought I was a relic, a doddering old fool with a failing mind, clutching to a piece of land that was, in their eyes, nothing more than a misplaced asset on a balance sheet. They had no idea who I was. They had no idea what I was capable of. My heart, which had been a frantic drum against my ribs for weeks, was now unervingly calm. The pain of their betrayal had burned away, leaving behind something cold and hard as forged steel. I was no longer a father grieving his son's weakness. I was an architect of justice, waiting for the final piece of my design to click into place. All rise. The bailiff's voice boomed, and we all shuffled to our feet. The judge entered, a man in his late 50s with tired eyes and a robe that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 sorrows. He settled into his chair, shuffling through the papers of the first case. In the matter of the conservatorship of Arthur Blackwood, he read the name aloud, his voice neutral, bored even. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the lawyers, then to Mark and Brenda, and finally his eyes landed on me. And then he stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, then disbelief, then a wave of something else, something I couldn't place. It was a look of profound, earth-shattering recognition. His professional mask crumbled for just a second. He leaned forward, peering over his spectacles as if he were seeing a ghost. The courtroom was silent, the air crackling with unspoken questions. Brenda's smug smile faltered, replaced by a frown of impatient confusion. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The judge ignored them all. His eyes, now wide and focused, were locked on mine. He cleared his throat, his voice no longer bored but thick with a strange, raw emotion. "Mr. Blackwood," he began, then paused, correcting himself. Arthur Blackwood, why are you here?" That question, so simple, so direct, was the key that unlocked everything. It was the beginning of their end. A cold, satisfied smile touched my own lips for the first time in months. They thought this was their stage, their moment of victory. They were wrong. This was my theater, and the final act was about to begin. I had waited for this. I had planned for this, and I was ready. To understand how we arrived in that sterile room, under the bewildered gaze of a judge who knew my name, you have to understand the land. You have to understand the promise I made to my wife, Helen, 30 years ago. The farm wasn't just dirt and buildings. It was a living testament to our life together. We had bought it with nothing but calloused hands and a shared dream. I remember the day we signed the papers, our hands trembling with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The main house was a wreck, its windows like hollow eyes staring out at fields choked with weeds. But Helen saw past the decay. She saw a home. She saw a future. "This is it, Arthur," she'd whispered, her hand in mine. "This is where we'll build our life. This is where we'll raise our family." And we did. We poured our sweat and our souls into that land. I worked the field from sunup to sundown, my body aching but my spirit full. Helen made the house a home, filling it with the scent of baking bread and the sound of laughter. She planted a garden of roses that bloomed in defiant bursts of color every summer. a splash of beauty against the rugged landscape. Our son, Mark, was born in that house. He grew up with the smell of freshly tilled earth in his lungs and the sun on his face. He was a good boy, a kind boy. He had his mother's gentle heart and, I thought, my stubborn work ethic. I taught him everything I knew: how to read the sky for rain, how to coax life from the stubborn soil, how to fix an engine with little more than wire and hope. My proudest memory was of him at 16, working beside me during a harvest that was so demanding it nearly broke us both. We worked for 18 hours straight, and as the sun finally set, he collapsed beside me, covered in dust and sweat, and grinned. "We did it, Dad," he'd said, his voice filled with a man's pride. In that moment, I saw the future of the farm. I saw the legacy continuing. I saw a life of purpose for my son. When Helen got sick, the farm became our sanctuary. In her final months, she would sit on the porch swing, wrapped in a quilt, and watch the sun dip below the horizon, painting the fields in gold and crimson. "Promise me, Arthur," she said one evening, her voice as fragile as a dry leaf. "Promise me you'll never let this place go. And promise me you'll always look after our boy." I held her hand, its skin thin as paper, and I promised. It was a vow etched onto my very soul. After she passed, the silence in the house was a physical weight. Mark and we clung to each other and to the familiar rhythms of the farm. For a few years, it was enough. The legacy felt secure. Then Mark met Brenda. She was vibrant and exciting, a city girl with a quick laugh and ambitious eyes. I saw how Mark looked at her, how his face lit up whenever she walked into a room. For his happiness, I was willing to do anything. I welcomed her into our home, into our family. At first, she seemed to make an effort. She'd compliment my garden, ask questions about the farm, and listen to my stories about Helen with a look of practiced sympathy. But I soon began to see the cracks in the facade. Her interest in the farm wasn't in its history or its soul, but in its acreage. She spoke of its development potential, of how much the land was worth. The words felt like sacrilege. To her, Helen's rose garden wasn't a memorial. It was a potential spot for a swimming pool. The change in Mark was gradual, a slow poisoning of the spirit. He started talking less about crop yields and more about stock portfolios. Brenda's whispers became his thoughts. "Dad, we need a small loan just to get a business idea off the ground," he'd say, unable to meet my eye. Of course, I gave it to him. I'd have given him anything. But the small loan was followed by another, larger one. Then they needed a new car. A European model, Brenda said, was safer. I sold a small and used parcel of land on the far edge of the property to cover it, telling myself it was a small price to pay for my son's happiness and my grandchild's safety. They had a daughter, Lily, a sweet girl who, for a time, brought a spark of Helen's light back into the house. But Brenda used the child as another lever. "Lily needs the best, Arthur. The best schools, the best clothes. We want to give her the world." And I, remembering my promise to Helen, remembering the joy of raising Mark, gave them what they asked for. I dipped into the savings Helen and I had painstakingly built over 40 years, the nest egg that was supposed to be my security in my old age. I gave it to them freely, believing I was investing in my family's future. I was a fool. I was watering a garden of weeds, and they were slowly choking the life out of everything I held dear. The condescension started subtly. "Dad, are you sure you should be climbing that ladder? Let's hire someone." "Dad, you forgot to pay the electricity bill last month." "Don't worry, I'll take over the finances. It's too much for you to handle." They began to treat me like a child, a liability. My opinions on the farm were dismissed with a patient sigh. My stories of the past were tolerated with a roll of the eyes. I was becoming a ghost in my own home, a walking, breathing relic whose only remaining purpose was to sign checks. The breaking point, the moment the grieving father died and the vengeful strategist was born, came on a Tuesday evening in late autumn. I was in my workshop, mending a piece of equipment, when I heard their voices coming from the kitchen. The window was slightly ajar, and their words drifted out on the cold night air, sharp and clear as shards of glass. It was Brenda speaking, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "It's not enough, Mark. The money he doles out in little bits isn't enough. The land is worth millions. We can't wait for him to just fade away. He could live another 20 years. Brenda, stop. Mark's voice was weak, a pathetic murmur. He's my father. He's an old man who's losing his grip, she snapped, her voice rising. Did you see him yesterday? He spent an hour looking for his glasses when they were on his head. He's confused. It's for his own good, don't you see? We can get a lawyer, go to a judge. We can argue that he's no longer competent to manage his own affairs, especially an asset this valuable. We'll get conservatorship. We can sell the farm, invest the money properly, and move somewhere decent. Lily deserves that. We deserve that. It's our time now. There was a pause. I held my breath, praying, begging my son to stand up, to defend me, to honor his mother's memory. All I heard was a tired sigh. Okay, Mark whispered. Okay, Brenda. We'll call the lawyer tomorrow. I didn't make a sound. I stood there in the darkness of my workshop, the cold metal of the wrench growing slick in my hand. The world narrowed to a single point of searing pain in my chest. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the casual cruelty of it. The way they spoke of me as an obstacle, a piece of furniture that was in their way. For his own good, the words echoed in the silent chambers of my heart. They were going to strip me of my home, my dignity, my very identity, and call it an act of kindness. The love I had for my son curdled into something cold and bitter. The promise I made to Helen shifted its meaning. Looking after my boy no longer meant indulging his weakness. It meant teaching him the hardest lesson of his life. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair, the one Helen had always loved, and I let the grief wash over me one last time. I mourned the son I had lost, and as the first gray light of dawn crept through the window, I put the grief away. I packed it into a small, dark box in the back of my mind and locked the door. What remained was pure, cold, unadulterated resolve. They wanted a confused old man. I would give them one. They wanted to fight. They had no idea the war they had just started. My transformation began the next morning. At breakfast, I accidentally poured orange juice into my coffee. Brenda shot Mark a triumphant, knowing look. I pretended not to notice. I started misplacing things, my keys, my wallet, important documents. I would ask them the same question 3 times in an hour. I played the part of man adrift in the fog of senility, and they lapped it up. Their condescension grew into a cloying, suffocating pity. "Oh, Dad, let me help you with that," Brenda would say, her voice dripping with false concern as I fumbled with a button on my shirt. They were so blinded by their own greed, so convinced of their own superiority, that they never saw the sharp, calculating mind working behind my vacant stare. While they were busy congratulating themselves, I was busy preparing for war. My first call was to George, an old friend and a semi-retired lawyer from a neighboring town. I didn't tell him the whole story, not at first. I framed it as a desire to get my estate in order. Just want to make sure everything is buttoned up. "George," I'd said, "the memory's not what it used to be." George, a man as sharp as a tack, even in his 70s, gave me a long, searching look, but he agreed to help. Under his guidance, I began to build my fortress. We started by meticulously documenting every single cent I had ever given to Mark and Brenda. I spent days poring over 2 decades of bank statements and checkbook registers. This small loan for their business, the money for the car, the endless infusions of cash for their lifestyle, it was all there, a staggering sum that told a story of relentless financial vampirism. I compiled it all into a neat, damning ledger. My next step was to dig deeper into my own past. I spent a week in the attic, surrounded by dusty boxes filled with the ephemera of a long life. I was looking for something specific, half-remembered act of kindness from a lifetime ago. And then I found it. It was a thick, manila folder labeled Simply Miller. Inside were faded receipts, a copy of a check I had written for an amount that was significant to me back then, and a letter. The letter was written on cheap stationery, the ink slightly blurred as if by tears. It was from a young man named David Miller. I sat there, dust motes dancing in the single shaft of sunlight from the attic window, and the memory came flooding back. It was over 30 years ago. A brutal winter storm had hit, one of those vicious blizzards that turns the world into a swirling vortex of white. Helen and I were hunkered down by the fire when we heard a frantic pounding on the door. It was a young couple, their faces pale with cold and fear. Their car had slid off the road and into a ditch. Worse, their infant son, bundled in their arms, was burning with a fever. They were on their way to a new job in a new state, with everything they owned packed in their broken-down car. They were desperate. Helen didn't hesitate. She took the baby, cooing softly, while I went out into the storm with a young man, David. We spent hours digging and winching that car out of the snow. Back in the warmth of the house, Helen had nursed the baby, using old remedies her mother had taught her. We gave the couple our guest room, fed them for 3 days until the storm passed and the roads were clear. When it was time for them to leave, David tried to pay me. He pulled out a crumpled wad of bills, all the money they had in the world. I refused. "You keep that," I told him. "You'll need it to start your new life. Just do the same for someone else someday." He had tears in his eyes. His wife, Sarah, hugged Helen tightly. A week later, the letter arrived. It was a heartfelt thank you, filled with promises to repay us someday and gratitude for saving their child. I had filed it away and, over the years, forgotten about it. Holding the letter now, a strange premonition washed over me. The name Miller echoed in my mind. I had no concrete reason to connect it to the present, but instinct told me this folder was important. I put it in my briefcase with the financial ledger. The final piece of my plan was to bait the trap. I knew Brenda was snooping, searching for proof of my incompetence. So I gave her some. I left a fake financial statement on my desk, one showing depleted accounts and foolish, nonsensical investments. I made a confused phone call to the bank within earshot of her, asking about money that wasn't there. I even lost a copy of my will, an old version that left everything to Mark unconditionally. I saw the glint of triumph in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. She believed she had everything she needed. A few weeks later, the official summons arrived. A courier delivered a thick envelope. Brenda handed it to me with a somber expression, a perfect mask of regret. "It's from the court, Dad," she said softly. "Mark and I are just so worried about you. We think it's time to get some help managing things." I looked at the papers, my hands trembling for effect. I allowed a look of fear and confusion to cross my face. "Court," I stammered. I don't understand." Mark, standing behind her, looked like he was about to be sick. But he said nothing. He just stood there, a hollow man propped up by his wife's ambition. They had no idea they weren't summoning a victim. They were summoning a judge. My judge. We return now to that courtroom, to the moment hanging in the air after the judge's question. "Why are you here?" Brenda's lawyer, a man named Peterson, recovered first. He cleared his throat officiously. "Your Honor, if I may," he began, his voice smooth and condescending. "We are here on a petition of conservatorship. My clients, Mr. Mark Blackwood and his wife Brenda, are deeply concerned for the welfare of Mark's father, Mr. Arthur Blackwood." He gestured toward me as if I were a piece of evidence. "Mr. Blackwood is 82 years old. He has, sadly, begun to exhibit significant cognitive decline. He is forgetful, disoriented, and has been making increasingly erratic financial decisions that jeopardize the family estate, a valuable piece of agricultural land that has been in their family for generations." Judge Miller leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving my face. He steepled his fingers, a thoughtful, almost pained expression on his face. "Go on." Mr. Peterson, emboldened, launched into his prepared speech. He painted a picture of a doddering, senile old man. He presented the fake bank statements I had planted as proof of my financial incompetence. He spoke of my delusions, my confusion. He even had the audacity to bring up the time I looked for my glasses while they were on my head, presenting it as a symptom of advanced dementia. Mark squirmed in his seat, his face turning a blotchy red. Brenda, however, watched with rapt attention, nodding at every point, a look of solemn concern expertly painted on her face. She was a masterful performer. When Peterson was finished, the judge was silent for a long moment. The courtroom clock ticked loudly, each second a hammer blow against the silence. Then he turned his gaze from me to my son. Mr. Blackwood, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. Mark Blackwood, is this true? Is this how you choose to honor your father? Mark flinched as if struck. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just stared at the floor, a portrait of filial failure. Brenda placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of support that looked more like a warden steadying her prisoner. Your Honor, Peterson interjected smoothly. My client is understandably emotional. This has been a very difficult decision for the family. Judge Miller ignored him. His attention was solely on me. Mr. Arthur Blackwood, he said, his voice softening slightly. Before I ask for your response to this petition, I have a question for you. A personal one, if you'll indulge me. Your late wife. Her name was Helen, wasn't it? A collective gasp went through the small audience. Peterson shot a confused look at Brenda, whose mask of concern was beginning to crack, revealing the hard, greedy face beneath. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and steady, betraying none of the feebleness they had described. Her name was Helen. She was the finest woman I ever knew. The judge nodded slowly, a sad smile touching his lips. I thought so, he murmured, almost to himself. He then straightened up, his demeanor all business once more, but with a new, intense focus. Mr. Blackwood, you may now address the court. I rose to my feet. I felt the weight of 82 years in my bones, but I stood tall. I did not look at my son or his wife. I looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I began, my voice ringing with a clarity that startled everyone in the room. You asked me why I am here. The reason stated on that petition is a lie. I'm not here because I am incompetent. I am here because my son and his wife mistook my love for weakness. I am here because they mistook my generosity for senility. I am here because they believe a parent's sacrifice is an entitlement, and that a lifetime of hard work is nothing more than a bank account for them to drain. I opened my briefcase and took out the ledger. Mr. Peterson claims I have made erratic financial decisions. He is correct, but not in the way he thinks. My most erratic decision was believing that giving my son and his wife nearly $200,000 over the last 10 years would earn me their love and respect. Instead, it only fueled their greed. I placed the ledger on the witness stand. Here is a complete accounting of every dollar, meticulously documented. Money for failed businesses, luxury cars, designer clothes, and exotic vacations. All while they told their friends and neighbors that they were struggling to care for the poor old man. Brenda's face had gone from confused to pale. She started whispering furiously to Peterson, who was frantically shuffling through his own papers, a look of panic dawning in his eyes. I wasn't finished. I reached back into my briefcase and pulled out the old manila folder. The one labeled Miller, but my greatest financial decision, I continued, my eyes locked with the judge's, was not recorded in any bank statement. It happened over 30 years ago on a bitter winter night. A young family's car broke down in a snowstorm near my farm. They had a sick baby and not a penny to their names. My wife, Helen, and we took them in. We fed them, sheltered them, and I spent a day in a blizzard fixing their car. When they left, we gave them $300, all the spare cash we had in the world, to help them start their new life. I held up the faded letter. They tried to pay us back, but we refused. I told the young man to simply pay the kindness forward someday. His name was David. His wife's name was Sarah, and their baby boy's name was Michael. The courtroom was utterly silent. Judge Miller had taken off his glasses and was wiping his eyes. His composure was gone, replaced by raw, undisguised emotion. He looked at me, his voice thick and trembling. I never got the chance to pay you back, Arthur, he said, his voice cracking. I tried. I sent letters, but they were returned. I rose in my career, became a lawyer, then a judge. I have a good life, a successful life. My son, Michael, is a doctor, and none of it would have happened if not for you and Helen. My son would not have survived that night. He put his glasses back on, but his eyes were now blazing with a cold fire. He turned his full, judicial fury on Brenda, Mark, and their stunned lawyer. You, he snarled at Peterson. You bring this petition into my courtroom? You accuse this man, this giant of a man, of incompetence. He slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking like a rifle shot. This petition is not just dismissed. It is dismissed with extreme prejudice. I am recommending you, Mr. Peterson, for a Bar Association review for filing such a frivolous and malicious suit against a vulnerable citizen. Peterson shrank back, his face the color of ash. Then the judge turned to Mark. His voice dropped to a low, devastating whisper. And you are his son. This man gave you life. He gave you a home. And this is how you repay him? You try to strip him of his dignity and his home, the very home his mother loved, so your greedy wife can have a bigger swimming pool? You are a disgrace to his name. You are a disgrace to your mother's memory. Mark finally broke. Sobs racked his body, and he collapsed in his chair, burying his face in his hands. Brenda, however, was not one for contrition. Her face, moments before pale with shock, was now twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "This is a conflict of interest," she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "You know him. You can't rule on this. We'll appeal. We'll get that farm. It's ours. He's a crazy old man." The bailiffs moved toward her, but Judge Miller held up a hand. He looked at her with an expression of utter disgust. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "your outburst has just confirmed everything your father-in-law has said about you. You are driven by nothing but greed. Now sit down and be silent, or I will have you removed and held in contempt." She stared at him, her chest heaving, but the threat in his voice was real. She sank back in her chair, defeated, her eyes burning with hatred. I quietly packed my briefcase, the ledger, the folder, the ghosts of the past, and the weapons of the present. I had won, but it was a hollow victory. I had saved my home, but I had lost my son. As the judge officially adjourned the proceedings, I turned and walked toward the exit without a backward glance. "Dad, wait." Mark's choked voice called after me. I stopped at the courtroom doors, but did not turn around. I couldn't bear to look at his face, to see the ruin he had made of himself. "Dad, I'm so sorry," he wept. She made me. I didn't. I love you." The words were a decade too late. The sentiment was a currency he had long since spent. "The man you call your father died a few months ago in his workshop when he heard you agree to sell his soul for a better lifestyle," I said, my voice cold and even. "I'm just Arthur Blackwood now, the owner of this farm, and you're no longer welcome on my property." I pushed the door open and walked out into the sunlight, leaving the wreckage of my family behind me in the stale, merciless air of the courtroom. In the months that followed, life on the farm returned to a quiet rhythm. The news of the courtroom drama spread through our small community like wildfire. Brenda, unable to face the public humiliation, left Mark and took Lily with her. Last I heard, she was living with her sister 2 states away. Mark was left with nothing. The business he'd started with my money had failed, and now he was alone, living in a small, rented apartment in town, drowning in his debts and his shame. He tried to call a few times, sent a few rambling, tear-stained letters. I never answered. I never wrote back. Some might call me cruel, unforgiving, but some betrayals cut too deep. They sever the roots of love so completely that nothing can ever grow there again. My promise to Helen was to look after our boy, and in a way I did. I allowed him to face the consequences of his own choices, to learn the brutal lesson that character is the only thing you truly own. It was the last, most painful act of fatherhood I could offer him. Judge Miller, or David as he insisted I call him, came to visit a few weeks after the hearing. He brought his son, Michael, the baby whose life my Helen had saved. We sat on the porch swing, the same one Helen loved, and we talked for hours. We talked about the past, about the weight of memory and the strange, circular paths our lives had taken. Looking at him, I realized that kindness is never wasted. It's an investment in humanity, a seed you plant that can grow into a forest of redemption a generation later. I spend my days now tending Helen's roses, working the land, feeling the familiar ache in my muscles that reminds me I am alive. The house is quiet, but it's no longer a painful silence. It's a peaceful one. I have my home. I have my dignity. And I have the satisfaction of knowing that I honor my promise. I protected the legacy we built, not just of land and soil, but of integrity and strength. They thought I was a weak old man. They learned that the oldest trees have the deepest roots. So what do you think? Was I too harsh? Or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice being served, please do me a favor and smash that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Thanks for listening.